All right. Hello again, everyone. Today we bring you a commentary response to the Larken Rose versus Lauren Southern debate that took place at Anarchapulco most recently. I'm going to assume that the people that are watching this video have already seen the actual debate itself, so I'm not going to play the debate in its entirety. I'm going to sort of focus on the points that I think I have something to add or that need to be focused on or corrected. I've only seen about the first 15 minutes of this so far because I just wanted to sort of like get the flavor of it before I did the actual commentary. I gotta say, Larken seems like he's in rare form in that he seems to be doing much better than I've seen him in previous debates. So I'm excited. I want to also remind people that I've already sort of corrected Lauren Southern pretty thoroughly on the borders issue in a previous video. You can find Anarchy Ball Man, I think was the video where she appeared on Anarchast, and I think I did a pretty good job of laying out the problems with her position there, but hopefully we'll get to do it again here. I'll link that video in the description if you're interested. And the last thing I want to say is a reminder that if you like this content and want to see more of it, you should do a few things. You should do the like and the subscribe and the bell and the sharing. And you should also check out the Patreon page and see if you're interested in becoming a patron to help support the show. I am making a serious go of bringing you news, current events, and commentary from an anarcho-capitalistic voluntarist perspective. I see a market demand for that. I see a hole in the market. I don't see enough of that content out there. If you agree and you like this, then please put your money where your mouth is, put your shares and your likes and your clicks where your mouth is, and help me grow this show to a critical mass. Let's get into this.
Most people I meet within this community are quite intelligent. However, unfortunately, within some situations, how clever you are can actually render you ineffective. It's a rather interesting and bizarre thing that's observed by psychologists, and that's the smartest people tend to have the most self-doubt. They tend to question themselves the most. They tend to consider more factors and run themselves in ideological circles more than anyone else. They're just far more effective at it. And sometimes that can be a very good thing. We should question ourselves. We should have some degree of self-doubt. But the degree of questioning we do should never render us ineffectual. We should never be sitting outside our front door with a list of pros and cons all day theorizing till the 7th page where we've got alien invasion on that list. Otherwise, you won't be able to achieve anything. There are endless amounts of questions we can ponder, but the only point in asking them is so that we can engage in the real world more effectively, so that we can engage in other people's lives more effectively and make decisive decisions. The unfortunate thing with libertarians and anarchists, as much as I love you lot, is despite their worship of steely-eyed, effectiveness-obsessed Randian characters, in the political realm, they tend to be an absolute non-starter. Almost every libertarian and anarchist I've met is at the very least, a few IQ points above the average person. But in almost all cases, they render themselves useless with endless theorizing. They go beyond just planning for that alien invasion, and y'all are up till 4 in the morning having debates on child slavery in texts that are longer than the freaking Bible. It's impressive. And I would categorize this in the mildly entertaining but useless argument category, and I would actually put the open borders debate in that category as well. It is completely useless when trying to engage with the wider world.
Unintelligent people, less intelligent people tend towards the violent solutions to problem solving rather than the ethical ones. Disparaging the debate club is something that Lauren Southern does frequently when discussing this issue with anarcho-capitalists or voluntarists or even libertarians. Talking about our tendency to go back and forth on the philosophical issues and the ethical issues like it's a bad thing, like it's not our best feature, like it's not our market differentiator from all of the other politicians and might makes right forces in the world. We're concerned with what actually is right, what actually is moral and ethical, and unfortunately, thousands of years of human history haven't solved this stuff yet for us. So we got to. Somebody has to. She's not going to do it. The Republicans aren't going to do it. The Democrats are definitely not going to do it. It's us. It's supposed to be the libertarians are supposed to be the party of principle. Voluntarism is all about the principle. Figuring out how that principle applies to the real world is the most important thing we can do. It's what will advance the world to freedom. It's not something to be embarrassed by.
So let's rip off that Santa Claus Band-Aid right now. Factoring out the highly unlikely apocalyptic style situation, in this day and age, fulfilling the precursors needed to have an open border state, such as getting rid of the welfare state, getting rid of democracy, and having immunity from foreign powers, is indeed a pipe dream. Don't cry to me about it. I didn't make the rules. I don't like the rules either. That would be human nature, the universe, God, thousands of years of history. You can blame them.
Do you see what she just did? She just baked in all the presuppositions she feels is necessary to justify using force at the border. But she failed to mention how the presuppositions, the state of the world, let's just assume for the moment, I think it's quite debatable that welfare is a foregone conclusion, that the state of the world is a foregone unchangeable conclusion. Well, let's just assume that for a second. How does that at all affect the ethics of the situation? It doesn't. And I'm going to probably keep bringing it back to that throughout this talk.
If I were a betting man, I would say that Larken is going full discussion into the hyper-theoretical, where I am obviously advocating that we shoot poor ladies walking across magical dirt into Canada, because that is clearly what closed borders people want.
So she's either playing ignorant or she is gaslighting. She's being deceptive. She's trolling. When voluntarists point out that all laws are enforced at the point of a gun, especially the border, if a little old lady tried to walk across the border right now, she would be shot and killed. If I tried to walk across the border right now, I would be shot and killed. That's not some canard. That's not some made-up extreme scenario that probably will never happen. That's real, and that would happen right now. A little old lady would be shot and killed if she tried to run across the border without her papers.
We shoot poor ladies walking across magical dirt into Canada, because that is clearly what closed borders people want.
That may not be what closed border people want, but that is the effect of their policy in the world. They support having armed men at the border controlling who walks through there. Government doesn't have a lever to pull that lets the peaceful people through and stops the welfare queens and stops the violence and dangerous people. There's one lever: control everyone or control no one.
But at the end of the day, for a myriad of reasons, the state is not going away. And while the state still stands, and while other states still stand, closed borders preserve far more freedom than open borders ever could.
You simply can't make that statement in a general sense. You simply can't. It's at the individual level. And an individual could be extremely negatively affected by the borders, and another individual might not be and might have more of their freedoms on par, in their opinion, preserved by the border. It's an individual thing, not a collective thing. She depends on collective arguments to make the case of the border.
And here laid out simply for you are my 4 reasons. The first one: borders prevent highly totalitarian groups, super PACs, and corporations from importing foreign voters to tip elections in their favor.
Well, it's almost like we should get rid of the state that holds these elections that control the people in the area then, right?
2, borders prevent the welfare state from growing, which prevents more money from being stolen from you, as you like to put it. They also prevent the state from inevitably collapsing, and no, before you think that's a good thing, I mean more, you all starve to death while the state still exists, like in Venezuela.
Sounds like we should get rid of the welfare state so that there isn't an organized power structure of men with guns controlled by voters to steal from us for the purposes of welfare.
3, closed borders prevent the invasion of a totalitarian culture. And this is something we really need to talk about, because I find totalitarian cultures to be far more of a threat than even government. Because I can go to Somalia, where their state has collapsed, and I still, if I'm born there, have a 98% chance of being dragged into a witch doctor's office screaming to have my genitals mutilated. Not so free there. Politics is downstream of culture.
I agree that politics is downstream of culture because, and only because, the government has to maintain a veneer of consent of the governed. And if the government governs too far away from culture, then people start to see behind the curtain. And I bet we're going to come back to this again later in this debate, because it was definitely one of her primary points in the past critique I did of her position. You don't get to control the politics of your neighbors. If somebody wants to buy the property next to you, if you don't want certain types of people buying that property, you better own it first and only sell it to the people who you want. Otherwise, you don't get a say. It's only through this massive monstrosity of government control and borders that people can even have the mechanism by which to have the hubris to want to control the thoughts of the people around them. It's obnoxious. It's really obnoxious stuff.
4, borders prevent the invasion and occupation of our land by totalitarian governments, more totalitarian governments actually, who would swoop in faster than a fat kid on cookies to get our resources in Lebensraum. Sorry, but whether you like it or not, in the age of nuclear weapons, drone strikes, and Navy SEAL teams, band of non-state forces cannot even remotely compete with these death machines that are state armies. I don't like it either, but it is a fact. Let's hope one of those death machines is on your side, because you're easy pickings for the rest of them if one's not, and some of them are not as nice as others.
One of those death machines is not on our side now. They're on their own side. That's the problem. This isn't a free market situation. The state death machines work for themselves to control resources and people. In a free market sans government, you would have probably some of the same types of corporations that are working to create weapons and defensive tools now and offensive tools now, except they would be having to sell to groups of people looking for collective defense in a voluntary society. We would be the customer. They would have to justify their cost and their expense and their actions to us, unlike now. Another thing I want to respond to is she talks about nukes as if that's some kind of eliminating factor that would prevent non-state defense forces from being able to defend themselves, when in fact it is the ultimate equalizer that would enable non-state defense forces to stand on par with any other group or power in the world. I want my defense company to have a nuke or two so that if some foreign death machine comes trying to take over the free land around me, that my defense company has something to, point at them to scare them off. Just like supposedly we benefit from the death machine's nukes now that we don't have any control over or say in or leverage over the use of, we would in a free society. It's not like those weapons cease to exist and cease to be available for those free non-state people. They would absolutely be available, and more and better and more efficient and more precise weapons could be developed in a free market scenario that doesn't exist now, where all major war is massive nation state on massive nation state. We've talked in other videos recently, I won't do a deep dive into it now, but Google Assassination Marketplace, probably from a Tor browser, but Google Assassination Marketplace, Assassination Politics, Google Assassination Politics, you'll learn how people have designed darknet type marketplaces where evil heads of evil massive death machines could be very easily sort of crowdfunded to target them, to dissuade them from wanting to attack a free, peaceful people. There's all sorts of market solutions, most of which we probably haven't even dreamed up yet because we're still stuck in this paradigm.
Now that my main arguments are out of the way, I just want to finish by doing Larken a favor of starting this debate on very clear grounds that he requests all closed borders advocates do. He demands we define our stance properly as the advocacy of a really long line of men with guns who allow you to enter a location only at a politician's discretion. And guilty as charged. Fine, that's exactly what I'm doing.
And that makes you evil. At least we've established that up front. When you use violence on peaceful people to get your way, that makes you the bad guy. That makes you evil. You've now brought the gun, the force, the violence to the discussion. I would not fault Larken if he stood up and walked away right now. You lost the debate just now. You brought the gun in the room. You lost.
Now, Larken, the real question is, will you admit what you're defending? An immediate disbanding of the only force effective enough to keep us from being invaded by a more totalitarian government and more totalitarian cultures than our own, at the peril of all our freedoms we have left, and simply for the purpose of signaling one's ideological purity.
So that was a statement followed by an insult phrased as a question. Obviously, I don't believe, and I think we can pretty easily prove that that's not how things would go down in a free society. and disparaging ideological purity is the most backwards, silly notion I've ever heard. You're going to make fun of someone who cares very deeply about being moral and ethical and not evil, as if it's like, as if that's a bad thing. That's what an evil person would say. That's really dumb.
Thank you.
Just want to say really quick, I'm a little concerned about the number of people clapping for that at Anarchapulco. I think that's some red flags there. What's going on with that group? What's going on with that event? Ugh.
That the only thing protecting us is the TSA? Really? That's why we're free?
No. It would be the men with guns, which is how you define borders. I'm going by your definition of borders, the men with guns, not the TSA.
She's conflating the state men with guns with the private citizens with guns. Two different things.
But the entirety of your argument was that the ends justify the means, and I wonder if you accept the exact same argument from liberals when they say, if we don't have gun control, we will have school shootings, we will have murder. What can we have to protect us if not disarming the people? How do you respond to them when you just use the exact same argument they do?
Well, that's the problem. You're saying it's the exact same when it's not the exact same argument. I actually happen to believe in some cases the ends do justify the means. Not all means are the same and not all ends are the same.
So another word for an ideological purist is someone with a consistent principle. And a principle's consistency and universality and the ability to apply a principle in all situations, in all cases, is where a principle gets its validity from. And so what she's just basically stated for us is that sometimes the ends justify the means and sometimes they don't. It's up to me. It's up to my opinion. A consistent principle would work the same way across all scenarios. For ethics to be valid, they have to be universal. They have to function the same way in all times, in all places, in all circumstances. If you get to pick how things work based on your feels at the time and what you value at the time, you've left the realm of ethics and you're just in a might makes right mob rule scenario, which is what you're worried about other countries importing into yours. You're already using their rubric.
100% chance of the welfare state collapsing, a 100% chance of your democracy being compromised, a 100% chance, in my opinion, of foreign cultures invading and destroying your culture.
I remember having responded to almost this exact same point in the last critique video of hers. Your predictions do not justify violence. In the case of like an imminent credible threat, someone is about to point the gun at you, you can respond with defensive force. But just because your distant future predictions say that a group of people is going to come do something that you don't like, you don't get to just bust out defensive violence. You don't get to attack peaceful people. You also don't get to justify defensive violence against an entire collective of people. You have to she has to collectivize people and not deal with them at the individual level for her argument to make any sense, for it to sound ethical. But for instance, the southern Mexican border with the US, you can't say things like we have to keep the Mexicans out. You can't say we are justified in using defensive force against Mexicans coming into the United States because they're going to use all of our welfare and take my gerbs. Because you're not talking about an entity called Mexican coming in doing these things. You're talking about millions of individuals, many of whom are peaceful, many of whom are not going to take welfare, many of whom are going to peacefully associate and voluntarily associate with others in jobs and relationships and all manner of other human interaction, which is perfectly moral and ethical. So you don't get to apply an ethic to a concept called a collective or a group of people. Ethics function on the individual interaction level.
Let me ask you something. Let's say you buy a house and you have a bunch of neighbors living around you, and your neighbors, you have an acre of property, they have a few acres of property, they're all living around you, and all your neighbors decide to invite over their friends from the Middle East, and they're all hardcore Muslims. What do you think's going to happen maybe a year or two from then when they decide, and none of those people agree with the NAP, by the way, none of those people agree with Western freedoms. In your area, what do you think's going to happen when they decide, oh, he's got a pretty nice water reserve there, he's got a pretty nice wife, he's got a pretty nice farm, some goats there. What do you think's going to happen to you?
I think the company that I hire to defend myself and my property and my family will make sure that I'm safe. My insurance policy will make sure that violent people are watched very carefully. My dispute resolution organization will flag groups, extremist groups, violent groups, and cut them off from meaningful society, disallowing their ability to conduct business transactions, get insurance, buy and sell property, buy food, buy supplies from the rest of civilized society. If at best, they would only be able to trade amongst themselves. And if they ever became an actual credible threat, violence would be used upon them. Targeted, carefully sculpted, free market violence. Rightful free market violence would be visited upon them. That's what I would think would happen.
I'm not guessing. What's going to happen is people who believe in freedom are going to be outnumbered. They are the minority in this world. Look at yourselves right now. This is the minority.
Yes.
Only 1% of people are libertarians.
True.
And the rest of the world, outside of America, outside of Canada, they are far more totalitarian than you can ever imagine.
Lauren, you are one of those totalitarian people that don't believe in freedom that is currently positioning herself as my enemy. You want a state to control me. You want a state to control my property. You want to control peaceful people that walk across imaginary lines coming and going. That's totalitarian. That's an enemy of freedom. So don't sit on that stage and pretend like you're a freedom lover fighting on the side of all the people in that room. You're on the other side right now. You're fighting for the state involuntary consent violating power to attack innocent people for nothing. You're not a friend of freedom when you take that position.
You are basically saying, I'm going to initiate violence. I'm going to advocate the initiation of violence, which you admitted,
yes, against
millions of people you don't know, because we have to keep out the people who advocate the initiation of violence. That is insane.
Not all ends and means are equal. I want to protect my children, my grandchildren, and their futures. I want there to still be a free world that exists. I want there to still be Western culture. I still want that to exist 100, 200 years from now, and I'm not willing to purity spiral saying I will be the last libertarian left in America that becomes Somalia just because I want to look like a damn good libertarian.
And I do what I do to protect my children and their future from people like yourself that think sometimes some ends justify some means. How is it not the same evil for her to be upset with other people that prefer their culture and want to spread and preserve their culture with violence? How is that not the same evil as her wanting to protect and preserve and extend her culture for her children with violence? She's on their team in this debate. She thinks she's fighting against them. She thinks she's trying to protect herself and her children from them, but she's taking the same ethical position as them. Use violence in defense of and in promotion of one's preferred culture. That's her rule. And that's a culture I would like my children to be protected from.
In a not so ridiculous scenario where the West is truly headed towards collapse, where mass immigration is going to lead to the deterioration of our values, and where anyone with half a brain knows that places like France, if they continue the way they are going to be under a literal Islamic caliphate, in a not so ridiculous and a very realistic scenario, yeah, I'm willing to violate the NAP in order to protect the last bit of freedom we may have left in this world. And sorry if I don't sound like a purist to you.
No, you just sound evil. That's all it comes down to. You're willing to violate the NAP. You're willing to attack innocent, peaceful people to control the thoughts and ideas of the people around you. If simply stating that isn't enough to show how absurd it is, if you get to attack other people to control the thoughts and beliefs of the people around you, then okay, that's the ethical rule. They get to do the same thing. Is that civilized? Is that how we grow freedom? If there's no centralized power structure for their culture to subsume and take over and lord over us, then it really doesn't matter what they believe, because we can defend ourselves with individual directed violence upon the specific aggressors.
You can't say that I'm coming up with ridiculous scenarios when you're saying I want to go point guns in the face of Mexican children. That is clearly ridiculous.
You said that. Men with guns on the border.
Men with guns on the border, but that's not what happens, does it? Thousands of Haitians rather, are coming over the Canadian border right now, and what's happening to them? If one of them had a gun put in their face, it would be an international story. People would go bizarre over it. That doesn't happen in real life, though. What happens is we're quite civil, thank God. Thank God they didn't walk over the non-existent borders of some Papua New Guinean tribe that would eat them because politics is downstream of culture. No, instead we bring them in, we process them, we check their background. A lot of them comply to legally come into the country. It isn't this ridiculous scenario of people just getting shot down at the border with flare guns by me.
Just because the law is not equally enforced doesn't mean that the threat of force isn't very real and present. If you chose a different border or section of an imaginary line and tried to run across it without permission slips and long lines and authorization, you would see that violence.
I can reductio ad absurdum yourself as well, and we can go into the whole, if I buy property all around your land, are you allowed to leave? Can I starve you to death in there? We can do the whole NCAP debate and run into the theoretical.
That NCAP debate that she's trying to bring up like an example of some absurdity has long since been resolved. It's called the donut homesteading problem. And it's solved by simply understanding that if you homestead a perfect circle around someone else's property and build walls and restrict access to someone else's land, you've de facto stolen their land, which is obviously a breach of the non-aggression principle. But I digress. She's trying to bring up a scenario that usually involves some debate and good discussion like it's a bad thing. But isn't it a virtue that we've managed to debate and solve this edge case scenario without the need for an appeal to government force and violence and men with guns? Isn't that a virtue? All she's got is, oh yeah, government guns. That'll solve that border problem. Government guns. Oh, sorry. I'm intelligent. I try and think of solutions too hard. I wish I was dumber and just would depend on guns.
How does that get rid of the borders?
And get rid of the violent aggression by ending the borders immediately.
Immediately?
Yes, immediately, because they are immoral now. You don't phase out evil, you oppose it.
All right, and which party is going to do this?
Neither, obviously.
Neither, so who's going to do it?
No one.
Right, because you guys are busy doing these ridiculous theoretical debates where you sit here and get nothing done in the real political realm. If you want to talk about actual policy changes that can be made to maybe get rid of the border and have the country succeed, we can do that. Or you can just sit in your little theoretical realm of bizarre scenarios where we get rid of the freaking border and everyone just has a gun and decides, woo, freedom, I want that, I love that, that sounds great, but it's not going to happen in the real world, Larken.
So at one point, people that believed that slavery was evil were in the minority, and they were such a small group of people that they might as well have been ignored because, you know, what they were wanting was just not practical and wasn't going to catch any traction. And certainly, you know, what a waste of time. They're just like sitting around in their small little circle jerks talking about how, oh, these people shouldn't be owned. It's just silly. Just silly. Why do they waste their time? This is a battle of ideas. This is a battle of ethics. This is a battle of principle. It starts small, as all movements do, and it grows over time, as this one has and will continue to do.
Politics is downstream of culture, and if you invite a whole heck of a lot more stupid people into your country, you're going to get a lot stupider of a government.
And the thing you're showing us is that a big part of American culture can be just as authoritarian as some of the people that you're trying to keep out. You just prefer their flavor of authoritarian a little better than the other guy.
If you are not advocating freedom, you don't get to freedom.
Sometimes there are worse paths and there are better paths. This is the problem. You are so purist. You are so stuck in statism. This is exactly what I was talking about in my intro. You are going to be stuck arguing the theoretical till the day you die, and your kids are not going to have a stick of freedom if we continue the way we're going. And you don't actually go into the government and try to make change. If you don't actually go into the culture and try to make change, you're busy theorizing around a bunch of people that agree with you.
You can tell that she's got nothing. You can tell that she's reached the end of her repertoire of arguments because she's falling back on sophistry. You're a group of, 4 or 5 neckbeards that are going to end up dying alone in your little circle, huddled in a corner, surrounded by Muslims with your little pure ethics tucked under your shirt. It's pure sophistry, and it's not an argument, and it's not even accurate. This movement is growing exponentially. Every week I meet new activists that are out there introducing new people to these ideas, creating more activists that are going to continue snowballing these ideas and these principles into the world. She's got no argument here. She's just bluffing like she has one.
My question is for Larken. I'm a Bible-believing anarchist, and I happen to know about the United Nations plan for mass Islamic immigration, which is already taking place in Europe, and it's coming here in my state of Minnesota. So I can understand and respect that you would like open borders, but I don't want Chinatown in my town. I want to go visit Chinatown in Chinatown. Are you aware of the satanic United Nations paying for mass immigration? Are you aware of that?
Not sure about this guy, but the principle is you get to control property you own. You don't get to control property that you do not own. If you don't want to live in Chinatown, you better buy or own all the land in the area. That's how you could control that. If you don't own all the land in the area, sorry, you don't get to use the guns of government to control land you don't own. That's evil.
So to finish this off, yes, I am arguing for the best of the worst. That is my position. Yes, I am arguing for some government in order to defend the maximum amount of freedom possible. And yes, I am going against the formal philosophy of what anarchy or even libertarianism may look like on text. I am arguing for the long line of men with guns that say, stay the hell out of my nation if you don't like our values.
Well, at least finally, after years of content on YouTube, she's straightforward with what she's for. She's for long lines of men with guns forcing everyone around her to behave in the way that she personally, subjectively prefers that everyone around her behave. She just doesn't want to have that rule apply to anyone but herself and her own opinions and her own ideas.
But that's because I am not here to engage with a book club, nor am I here to play around with people's unicorn fantasy worlds where we just magically disband the state without catastrophic consequences.
She's not here to engage with magical unicorn pixie dust book clubs. Well, I'm not here to engage with a violent thug who wants to use stolen resources to pay for men with guns to control me and my friends and family and children and future over something they're hyper concerned about called culture that collectivizes necessarily everyone around them.
I am here to defend truth, not theory. I am here to defend reality and not purity. You can call me all the names you want in the book. Racist, like some guy over here. Doesn't change the fact that blacks commit a disproportionate amount of crime. You can call me a sexist. It doesn't make biology not matter. You can call me an Islamophobe. It won't get rid of all of the verses in Quran calling for murder. Or you can call me a statist. It won't change the fact that open borders are a damn pipe dream that will lead to a catastrophic collapse of our freedoms and values and society. My interests, my family, my friends, my history, my culture, my tradition, and my freedom, they still exist in this world to some extent. And I am going to fight for that world, and I'm going to argue in favor of the best solutions for that world in the realm of reality. And I don't give a damn what you call me, so.
And I haven't called you a racist, I haven't called you an Islamophobe, I haven't called you a sexist, but I am calling you evil. I am calling you an enemy of freedom because your position is one of attacking peaceful people. And that's what this really, in actuality, all comes down to. There are peaceful people doing things that you want to use violence against to make the world around you into the way you want it to be. Just like the people you're worried about coming around you from other countries that want to do the same. You're no different. You're no better. You want to use violence to control the people around you. Calling the thoughts and feelings and preferences of the people around you culture as if it's some tangible thing that exists that can be attacked and injured. Don't you see that when you use a different rule for yourself than you afford those around you, that your position loses its validity, its power. And all you have left in the world is might makes right. Whoever has the most might wins. And don't you see that you're using the same principle as the people around the world that prefer their culture and want to use violence to make the people around them defer to what they personally think is their culture? There's a million ideas on what Western culture is. Why does yours get to override everyone's? If the rule is we all get to use violence to defend our culture, then you have to afford me my culture, and my culture is one of peace until aggressed upon. And when I'm aggressed upon, I get to respond with violence. And so you have to afford me my ability to use violence against people that are aggressing against me. You are a person aggressing against me. So to be consistent, you have to allow me to use violence on you. If you chose not to allow me to use violence on you in defense of my culture, then you're a hypocrite. Your ideas are invalid, they're vapid, and they're meaningless. A person that wants to live by rules that only apply to themselves and not others, a person that says, I get to do this, but you don't, because I say so, they are fit for nothing other than being ignored. And I think the tale of history will show that your position of using violence to control people for any purpose, call it some high word, call it culture, you deserve to be ignored. My principle is one that I can and do hold myself to and equally afford those around me. I will not attack you as long as you're peaceful. And I expect the people around me to not attack me as long as I'm peaceful. My principle can be universalized. Yours cannot. Yours is one of, oh, I get to do this, but you don't. My ends justify my means, but I don't like your ends, so you don't get your means. So I think that's my conclusion. Thankfully, she's been clear in her positions and not tried to obfuscate as so many do. She is inconsistent and embraces that fact like it's a virtue, when in fact it just means that she is fit to be ignored. Ignored by us, ignored by peaceful people, ignored by civilization, ignored by culture, ignored by our culture, ignored by the future, and ignored by the future's history. She's fit to be watched cautiously like the threat to freedom and liberty that she is. And she's fit to just be ignored. You don't bring a gun to a debate of ideas and get to walk away a victor.